Hi, my name is Beth Massey, and welcome to the Windows Forms over Data video series. In this first video, we're going to walk through creating a SQL Server database through Visual Studio's Visual Tools. Besides Visual Studio, you'll need to install SQL Server. There's a free edition of Visual Basic and a free edition of SQL Server that you can install and use. To create a database through Visual Studio, we're going to use the Server Explorer. You can access the Server Explorer window by selecting View from the main menu and selecting Server Explorer. If you're using Visual Studio Express Edition, this window is called the Database Explorer. Okay, let's add a new database. First thing we're going to do is right-click on Data Connections and choose Create New SQL Server Database. The name of my SQL Express database server is Local SQL Express. The S application is going to be an order management system with customers, products, and orders, so I'm going to name the database OMS, which stands for Order Management System. Sounds good? Okay, now we're ready to start defining our tables. So the first table we're going to add is called our customer. So we're going to expand the database, right-click on Tables, and Add New Table. This will open up the Table Designer. Okay, the first column we're going to add is called Customer ID. Type integer, and we're not going to allow nulls. The customer ID is going to be the primary key of this table, and a primary key is a value that can be used to identify a unique row in your table. And we use these keys to relate rows across tables. So what we're going to use is called an identity column. And an identity column is used to automatically number a field based on the previous field's values for the existing rows, like an auto increment. So let's see, we're going to scroll down here to identity of specification. Is identity, we're going to say yes. So now all we have to do to indicate that this is the primary key of the table is to right-click on the column and set primary key. Otherwise, we can come up here and use the toolbar button. If we click it again, removes the primary key. Okay, the next column we're going to add is a last name. And we're going to make this a varchar 50. And we're not going to allow nulls. So when we say that a column cannot be null, we're basically just saying that it's a required field. The database will reject updating or inserting this customer row if the last name column isn't specified. So let's add a few more fields here. How about a first name? An address? A city? State? And we'll make this a char2. And the reason why we're going to do this is because we're only going to store the two-letter state code. So we know that it's always a fixed 2-character in length, as opposed to the other fields here that are varchar 50, varchar 25. That means that they're variable length strings. And we'll put a zip code. Oops, we're going to make this a varchar 10. So the last field we're going to add to our table is called modified. This is going to be a timestamp. SQL Server timestamps are automatically generated unique binary numbers within your table. We're going to use this as a mechanism for version stamping rows in our customer table. The storage is just 8 bytes. Okay, now let's save our table. The first thing I'm going to do is type a name in the property sheet, customer. And then we'll just click Save. Great, so now we see our customer table shows up under the tables, and here are all our fields. So now we're going to enter some data into this table. So we're going to close down the designer. I'm going to go back over to our customer, right-click, and you'll see Show Table Data. So let's add a couple rows of data to our customer table. Specify the last name, first name, address, city, state, zip code. You'll notice that there are exclamation points on the columns in this row. And what that means is the data hasn't been committed to the database yet. Once we move off the row, the database will check the constraints we set up on the fields. So we specified that the last name is a required field. So as you can see, moved off the row, everything's fine. So let's try an example where we don't specify the last name field and move off the row. You'll see that the database reports an error. Cannot insert the value null into column last name. Okay, so let's fix this up. Move off the row and everything is fine. Okay, so now we have some data in our customer table. The next table we're going to add is the product table. So we're going to go right click on tables again, add new table. The product table is just a lookup table. We use the lookup values on our orders. So first we're going to have a product ID. It's going to be an integer. Since it's going to be our primary key, we're going to also have it be an identity column. Going to right click, set the primary key. Our product has a name and a description. Then we'll just enter the name, product, here in the property sheet. And click Save. And now you see product show up here in the list of tables. So the next table we're going to add is the orders table. So we're going to come and right click, add new table. We're going to name it orders. The reason why I'm not naming it order is because order is a keyword in SQL Server. So we're going to have an order ID, which is going to be our primary key. And we're going to make it an identity field. Right click, set the primary key. The next field is going to be the customer ID. This is going to be a relation to the customer table because the customer has many orders. This is called a foreign key. The way we set this up is we right click, select relationships, select add, and then we specify what the primary key table is, customer, and the foreign key table is orders here, and we select a customer ID field. So when we set up this relationship between customer and order, what we're doing is setting up referential integrity. And what this means is that the customer ID field here in the order table must have values that are inside the customer table, customer ID. So if we try to delete a customer that has orders in this case, the database will not allow it. We could also set up our relationship to cascade deletes so that when we delete a customer, the orders are automatically deleted. The idea here is that we're never going to have orders that do not have a customer. So the database maintains the integrity of the data when we set up these relationships. That's why it's very important to make sure you set up your referential integrity between your tables properly. Okay, another field. It's going to be order date. Will be a date time field. And ship date. Just press save. And now it warns us that the following tables will be modified, customer and orders. This is because we set up the relationship. Click yes. And now we've got our order table. Okay, the last table we're going to add to the system is order details. And this is a child of order. So we're going to add a new table. This time we're going to call it order detail. It's going to have a primary key, order detail ID. It's going to be an identity specification. Yes. It's identity field. And then we're going to right click and set the primary key. Just like customer is a parent of orders, orders is a parent of order detail. So we're going to add order ID here as a foreign key into this table. So we'll right click and select relationships. And now we're going to add the relationship between the orders table and the order detail table, relating it on the order ID. Okay, close. We're also going to have a foreign key into the product table, because we're going to select products as the line items, as the order details of the order. So again, right click, select relationships. I'm going to add. And this time we're going to select product ID, related on product ID in the order detail. So the next field we're going to add is a quantity. And we're going to make this a required field, but we're going to make it have a default of 1. And a price. And this will be a money. Okay, so now we can save our table. It again warns us about the changes we're making to the relationships in these tables. Yes. And now we see our order detail table here in the list of our database tables. Okay, now that we have our database tables defined, we could start developing our application. But what if we wanted to add a stored procedure to our database? If we scroll down here, we can see we have stored procedures. We don't have anything defined here. What is a stored procedure anyways? Well, a stored procedure is similar to a method or a function in Visual Basic. They're used as a way of executing code, T-SQL code, by name. So instead of embedding SQL strings inside of our VB code, we can call stored procedures instead. So if you're building multi-user client applications or high throughput applications, or maybe you require a finer granularity of security on your data, that's when you probably are going to want to use a stored procedure. You also may want to just improve manageability across several applications that use the same queries like in an enterprise. So stored procedures can be a good idea at that time too. It's not to say that embedding T-SQL code directly in your VB code is wrong. It's perfectly fine to do that, especially if you're developing simple single-user apps or you're using the Visual Studio tools to manage that generated code. But let's say for this example, we'll be creating a multi-user application, and we'll have some security requirements on it where connections will not be able to insert, update, or delete data directly by issuing those statements. Instead, all we want to do is allow select and execute permissions. So to create these stored procedures, we right-click here on Stored Procedures, and then we select Add New Stored Procedure. So notice the editor window displays a template for us to create procedure. Well, I already have some snippets defined. So we're going to first create our delete procedure. So this is called delete customer. And this procedure is very simple. All it's going to do, we're going to pass in the customer ID, and it's just going to delete that customer row where that customer ID matches what we passed. So all we have to do now is press save. And notice that it changes to alter procedure, because if we were to change this procedure again and press save, it would apply those changes into the database. So it's managing that for us here. Okay, so the next procedure we're going to add is our insert. So we're going to go back to our Server Explorer, right-click on Stored Procedure, Add New Stored Procedure. This time, I'm going to use the snippet for insert. Now you'll notice this is a little different. We're passing in all the parameters, all of the columns, and then we have 2 output parameters, customer ID and modified. As you recall, customer ID is our primary key, and the database automatically generates an identity because we set it up as an identity field. And same with a timestamp value. It's generated on the row in our modified column. So in this procedure, all it's doing is inserting the customer row with the values we passed. If that did not produce an error, then we're just reselecting the ID and the modified, the 2 generated columns, when we do the insert. Now this where customer ID equals scope identity means that the scope identity is the identity that was assigned for this call. That way we're assured to get the identity that was used when this insert statement executed. So we're going to press save here, and you'll notice it changes to alter procedure. Okay, so the last procedure I want to add is going to be the update. So we're going to come back, right-click, add new stored procedure, and now I'm going to use the update snippet here. So update is similar to insert, except this time we don't need to get the customer ID back. We just need to return the modified column back, because that's the only thing that's changing when we do the update statement. So now you'll have an update, and in the where clause on the update, we're making sure that we're updating the current customer that we've passed in, and we're checking that the modified value hasn't changed. Now, if the modified value has changed, that means another user edited the record while we weren't looking. And we don't want to allow that for this application because there could be some data that is relied on each other and the user will not have seen the changes made to the record while they were editing it. So it's safer just to say that we couldn't update this and let the user reselect the row and try again. So what I'm doing here is if there was an error, we're going to raise an error concurrency violation on table customer. Okay, so let's save this. And now we've got all of our delete, insert, and update for our customer. So now when we use ADO.NET to send updates, deletes, and inserts, we can use these stored procedures instead of embedding the SQL code directly into our VB code. So you could add stored procedures to insert, update, and delete the rest of the tables in the database using this exact same pattern. Okay, now we're done creating our order management system database. We created all of the tables, the fields, set up the relations between those tables, added some stored procedures. The next video, we'll talk about how to create our application and connect to this database. So I'd like to thank you very much for your time. If you want, you can check out the Visual Basic Developer Center for any updates we might have to these videos. And you also can check out the VB team blog and my blog. Thanks again.